Hello, and welcome to Enjoy Classical Music. But hang on, what actually is classical music? Is this classical music?
Summertime.
No? Then how about this? It's actually the same tune, composed by George Gershwin, but played with different instruments in a concert hall. So does that mean classical music is music played in an auditorium with classical instruments?
You can tell everybody.
Maybe not. You see, part of the problem is that classical music is a very slippery phrase. It can mean different things in different contexts. Firstly, and most specifically, classical music refers to a genre of music that existed in the late 18th and early 19th century. This capital C classical music is the music of Mozart and Haydn. It comes after the Baroque age and the music of composers like Bach and Handel, and before the Romantic age, composers like Brahms and Wagner. And yet, the term classical music, with a small c, soon came to refer to the work of all these composers right across all these periods, who were composing music for the concert hall and opera. This takes us through very different composers, Bach, Mozart, Brahms, all the way through to our own time, with composers like Steve Reich, who's still alive today. All these composers wrote down music that could be recreated in the concert hall or opera house. Even though centuries span the works of these very different composers, all their work has come to be umbrellaed under the all-encompassing term classical music. So classical music now doesn't just mean specifically the work of this 70-odd year period, but the work of all these composers. And yet it doesn't even end there. I'll show you what I mean. Listen to this. Is this classical music? Certainly my kids would call this classical music, as they yelled at me to switch it off. But this is church music from the late 16th century. This is music specifically designed to be played in church as part of a religious ceremony. The idea that music like this would provide concert hall entertainment for listeners would have totally surprised a contemporary listener from the 16th century. This is music for the church. This is not for fun. So then how about this?
Now is the month of May, when merry lads are playing.
Again, my kids would say classical music. It's written about the same time as Palestrina, within 10 years. It's vocal music just like the Palestrina, but it couldn't be further from the music of Palestrina. This is a sexy, raunchy ballad. I mean, what do you think the merry lads are doing with their bonny lasses on the green grass? Far la and hey nonny, we know exactly what that's about. So, two totally different kinds of music, which at the time couldn't have been more different. Any clergyman at the time would have been shocked you'd even considered these two genres of music remotely the same. And yet today, they're both what my kids would call classical music. And this is what happens. The music from the past, often the popular and well-loved music, the music from the past that survived, we call that music classical music. It's an irony, really. Today we think of classical music as difficult, complex work that is hard to understand. And yet, it's usually just the popular music of its day. Think of the student concert goers queuing to see Handel's Esther at the Sheldonian in Oxford. Some of them had actually sold their own furniture for the 5-shilling entrance price. This was the must-see show of its day. Or think of those 19th century dock workers singing Verdi's latest tunes as they worked. The Italian composer was hugely popular in his day, as attested by the thousands that thronged the streets for his funeral. Or think of the ladies swooning and fainting at Liszt's latest piano concerts. This was the Beatlemania of its day. You see, what we label as classical music is often just the music of the past that has survived to this day. And that's not a bad thing, because generally, only the best things survive. This is artistic Darwinism. Think of architecture. You go around a city and you look at the buildings from the past, the ones that have survived, are generally the more beautiful ones, because the ugly ones get pulled down and rebuilt, which means the buildings of the past which survive, the Gothic cathedrals, the Roman amphitheatres, they're generally the best of their kind, and they survive by being beautiful and impressive. And it's the same with classical music. You're getting the best music of the past that survives to this day. which means classical music is this, and this, and this, and this, or this. It's really such a huge range of music, and that makes everything hugely more exciting for us, because there's so much more we can enjoy. So, which definition of classical music are we going to use on this channel? Is classical music the generic music of Mozart? Or is it the music of all his fellow composers, past and future? Or is it all of these? In fact, are we referring to any music of the past that survived to this day? And the answer is all of these. In fact, I wouldn't even worry about strict definitions of what is classical music. It's much more important to actually listen to the stuff and enjoy it and understand it than trying to tie it down to a dictionary definition. And who knows, anyone listening to Lana Del Rey in 200 years might call that classical music too.